Hello and welcome to the Haaretz podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. We are well into August now, and not only is the weather heating up, but the election campaign in Israel is getting pretty hot as well. Here with me to review all of the very hottest developments of the week are our two star members of the Haaretz election team, columnist Joshua Leifer and correspondent Linda Diane. Welcome, Josh and Linda.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Allison.
81 days till the election, guys. I've started the countdown. So tell me, now that the immediate threat of resuming war with Iran has subsided for the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, are we feeling it in the air yet in Israel, or are people too busy on the beach, in the pool to pay close attention? Are people buzzing and talking about the election now?
I would say that people are talking about the election, but as the concerns about Iran are kind of going down a little bit, concerns in the West Bank are rising a little bit. People are looking at what's happening there, and there's more and more talk of, well, do you think there's going to be another intifada? And that's also becoming a more and more likely scenario. So we've kind of left one conflict on the back burner and are going back to another. So I don't think we can be completely divorced from the security scenario. But at the same time, it's definitely the dinner table chat, the election.
On the one hand, it certainly is the dinner table conversation. But on the other hand, it's a little boring in the sense that it seems like the Netanyahu camp is having a hard time making its attacks on Gadi Eisenkot's stick. But there was a few notable instances that I saw getting some kind of viral circulation, one of which was an interview with Likud stalwart Dudi Amsalem, who said twice in two interviews that Gadi Eisenkot is the kind of person that he would have liked to see in Likud, which is sort of a strange thing to say about your opponent, but reflects in some way the challenge that Likud has in an opponent like Eisenkot. And then the other one was a video in which kind of right-wing provocateur Mordechai David accosted Gadi Eisenkot on the beach. And Gadi Eisenkot's response to him, and this obviously played super well with Eisenkot's kind of core potential constituency, was, come back and talk to me when you've served in the army. So again, I think that as far as the campaign is going, there are these sort of micro media pseudo events, but there isn't a lot of serious terrain changing events yet. But again, it's 80 days in Israeli politics is a long time.
So when we look at the election tracker, which aggregates all of the polls every week, which we try to note on this podcast, the big picture looks exactly the same. The prime minister's coalition is at 50 seats, but that is counting the 4 seats of this new Zionist home party, which is not a sure thing for his coalition. And the anti-Bibi opposition camp stands at 60, just short of the threshold for a clear victory. A clear coalition would be dependent on one of the Arab parties. They're all polling together at 10 seats now. The coalition to oppose Netanyahu would need one of those parties to join them to put them over the line to form a coalition, or defectors from the coalition. They could also, move and, put them over the top to defeat Netanyahu. But like you mentioned, Josh, when we look at one other trend, I noticed a poll that asks every single week, who is more suited to be prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu or somebody who isn't Benjamin Netanyahu? They don't name one of the many contenders for the throne. And this week, 56% said not Netanyahu. Even more significantly, the number who said yes, Netanyahu, dropped to 31%. Less than a month ago, it was at 37%. So that's 6 whole points in just a few weeks, short of a month. So, Josh, is this a sign that even members of the base, who've always said that, he has this indisputable base, do you think that they finally had enough of him? Or do you think that it's because maybe Gadi Eisenkot is looking like a viable alternative that the Netanyahu base can swallow, and so more are slowly migrating over into the camp of, maybe somebody besides Bibi could be prime minister?
Yeah, I think that, and the first thing I'll say is, in this way, it may be helpful to think about Trump as an example, in the sense that Trump, like Netanyahu, is one of these authoritarian populist leaders who has, no matter what, a super hardcore base that is never going to leave them no matter what. For Trump, when he said I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, I think that was an accurate assessment of his certain degree of support. Netanyahu is sort of similar. The question is, what is that actual percentage? Is it 42%? Is it 39%? Is it potentially lower than that? And I have watched this these numbers shift over the last couple of weeks also. And the thing that I keep thinking is there is to throw back the kind of economic or stock market metaphor, like the minute that Netanyahu's stock seems weak, people will start selling it. And I think that has begun to happen, especially as the political system, as in like current politicians and potential politicians, are speaking openly about what it would mean for Eisenkot to be prime minister, or if not be prime minister, then at least be given the first crack at forming a coalition. Again, like I don't want to, the optimistic scenario is that we're on the cusp of a kind of fire sale in Netanyahu's political stock, and that by come election day, there's not going to be very much left because people will have already made the kind of switch in their heads that the Netanyahu era is over. There have been defections in Likud within his own party, joining various other right-wing parties within the anti-Netanyahu opposition. At the same time, it's always dangerous to eulogize Netanyahu's political career because he can't, he's come back in the past and he could come back before. And we also don't know, again, like I said in the beginning, we don't know what the actual size of that hardcore base is and how resilient it is despite reality. And we also, apropos what Linda said at the beginning, we also don't know what could change in the security situation and how that might potentially redound to Netanyahu's benefit. I mean, we're talking right now today where Netanyahu just announced that the Board of Peace plan that Trump had pushed, Israel's doesn't feel obligated to abide by what's been laid out in the agreement. That could mean a return to hostilities. There have been hostilities throughout the ceasefire. There's a whole realm of other events that could happen that might potentially reverse some of those trends. Although on the other hand, the political map has been pretty stagnant basically since October 7th.
I was this weekend outside of the Tel Aviv political bubble and went to go visit some friends from Beersheva. And of course, because it is forbidden not to, we talked about the elections and what that means. And these aren't necessarily Likudniks. They aren't necessarily Netanyahu hardcore fans, but they're people who wouldn't define themselves as leftists. And one of them said, there's a replacement, which is a thing that we haven't been hearing in a very, very, very long time. The people who aren't part of that, rah rah Netanyahu hardcore are usually just saying, there's no one who can replace him who has the experience that we need and who has the gravitas that we need. For the first time in a very long time, the people are saying, it looks like there's someone who can actually do it, which has been very impressive to hear.
We now have a new crowd in the we're right wing, but we don't want Netanyahu space. We talked about the Zionist Home Party, which debuted a couple of weeks ago. There's Benny Gantz hanging around saying that I'm also going to be, right wing, but I'm not going to be guaranteed to go with Netanyahu or not go with Netanyahu. So now we have this new party that doesn't have a name yet. Former Israeli ambassador to the UN and senior Likud member Gilad Erdan is its leader. Number 2 is former Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein. They held a press conference. Erdan says he is parting ways with Likud, the political home where I grew up for more than 30 years, because he can no longer call it home because Likud lawmakers no longer represent Likud voters. There's also talk of Ayelet Shaked. They're saying that about 4 parties now are trying to move into this space of I'm right wing and I'm not promising that I'm not going to join coalition with Netanyahu, as opposed to people, let's say, like Naftali Bennett or Avigdor Lieberman, who say we're right wing, but we will never, ever, ever form a coalition with Netanyahu. So what is the bottom line here with the crowd of appeals to right wing voters who are sick of Bibi? Can this pie of anti-Netanyahu right wingers be sliced thin? And I think probably more importantly, are we looking at a potential for, if any of these parties gain traction or if they all come together or something, form some sort of we're going to put a check on Netanyahu group that could put the coalition over the 60 seats and get Netanyahu in power, presumably checked by some of his disaffected former allies.
I will just say, incidentally, I have heard nobody be excited about this. I have not heard a single person say, yes, this is what I wanted all along for a Gilad Erdan party. Like, these aren't necessarily people who have a following as people. And I think a lot of people looked at the party led by Benny Gantz in the past and kind of said, okay, this is what happens when you vote for people who are right-wing, or at least declare themselves right-wing, but not Netanyahu. They just end up kind of falling in line, and it just gives us more of the same.
Benny Gantz joined Netanyahu governments twice and just sort of got, steamrolled over by Netanyahu.
Exactly. Despite all the promises and despite a lot of people being very confident that he could be the replacement that everybody was waiting for, we just ended up with more and more of the same.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things going on here with the proliferation of Likud satellite parties, basically. I also have not heard anyone excited about these parties, and I also think that they're not polling particularly well. Usually when a party announces, it gets a boost in the polling, and even when these parties announce, they hover around the electoral threshold. I would be very surprised if either of them actually pass, because people tend to, as election day approaches, at least if this is how if past voting behavior is future voting behavior, people tend to gravitate towards the larger parties as election day grows closer. But in terms of why is this happening? I think that for a party like the Yuli Edelstein and Gilad Erdan party, this is basically an attempt to guarantee them a political future in the event that Netanyahu takes Likud down with him. That there is a big question about what remains of Likud when Netanyahu leaves. I mean, lots of Likud backbenchers who tend to be much more extreme have said things like, well, there's not actually a really big ideological difference between Likud and Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, Otzma Yehudit. And I think that's true, that Likud parliamentary representatives right now are much more ideologically right-wing and religious than your average Likud voter. And so one of these parties, or both of them, are trying to kind of position themselves, even, I think, regardless of what the electoral outcome is, as the kind of successor to what the Likud once was after it's been demolished. But the other thing that I think is happening in terms of the election is that a lot of people have looked at Naftali Bennett's success in becoming prime minister in 2021, despite being leading only a party with 6 seats. And there's a kind of hunger to be the party that is the kingmaker, that you can't form a coalition without them, and then that puts the party in a position of maximum leverage, and then that's where their kind of ideological amorphousness comes in. And so someone like Gilad Erdan or even Chili Toper and Yoaz Hendel, another party, can say, if the Likud is willing to sit in a coalition that we lead, then everyone's welcome. We don't boycott anyone, is kind of their rhetoric. And so that, I think, is the play in terms of keeping the right in power. I think that's the play that they'll kind of try to do what Naftali Bennett did in 2021, just on the other side. But again, I think the chances of that happening are very, very slim. And I think the Israeli public would have a hard time swallowing a scenario again where a very small party and its leader ends up forming the government. And when you have a scenario, if the polls remain what they are, that Eisenkot's party is clearly should have received the mandate to be the central coalition party.
Presumably, this would give the very adamant anti-Netanyahu opposition, a chance to sort of surge and rally, because the coalition seems a little bit weak and divided now. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening, right? The opposition can't seem to get its act together. Naftali Bennett and Lieberman, they're kind of acting like kids who feel like Eisenkot has skipped them in line, and they are not agreeing to stand behind whoever in the opposition wins the most votes in the election. And that really seems to be against what we hear on the ground from regular voters who are saying, we don't care which one of you replaces him. We just need to get rid of Bibi. So can you please suck it up and unite? Linda, is that how you perceive it as well?
Yeah, everyone's kind of sick of this. There's been a lot of talk of people who know that they're not necessarily going to be getting the most votes, saying that they still want to be prime minister. And a lot of commentary about that, saying well, actually, maybe we should go with what logic and the will of the people want in this particular case. I was at a conference not long ago where Lapid gave a speech that was basically like, close your eyes and imagine a future where Eisenkot links with us and we become the hugest party and everyone's having a wonderful time. And Eisenkot was interviewed about that not long after, and he said, that was a really weird thing to say. I have no plans of doing that. I think the public to a degree wants everybody to link up, but I think the public also, like, there is no one public. I think a lot of us are also looking at these particular parties and are kind of glad that there are individual parties representing individual needs who have these individual issues that they're pushing. Even though so many in the opposition are actually so similar. But I think everybody is just kind of tired of these games of jockeying for position and just want to have a fair fight that is winnable rather than watch these men try to clobber each other for power.
Josh, there's going to be a landslide against Netanyahu a point of view. That's what you've expressed so far in our podcast. Are we in danger of everyone's egos getting in the way of removing Netanyahu? I mean, won't he be smart in this and, divide and conquer?
So I want to correct and say, I'm not saying there will be a landslide. I'm saying it's possible. Like, I think I want to put that scenario into the realm of possibility because of how polling has been and because of what public sentiment is and because of how badly his campaign is going so far. What worries me more than the infighting, I actually think the infighting is productive politically and that it hashes out the differences between these parties. Avigdor Lieberman is not Yair Golan, who is not Naftali Bennett. And there was for a long time a certain kind of blurriness between the distinctions of these parties. And the reason why that matters is because liberal voters should vote for parties who align with their views and not give their votes to people who are right-wing. So I think it's generally a good thing that as the election has gone closer and Naftali Bennett has shown more of who he is, that people who understand themselves as strongly within Israel's liberal democratic camp have left, who were, as in the Israeli political parlance, like parked in his camp, have left because they realize that he doesn't represent the kind of values that they have. What worries me more is that I think that in the certain right-wing parts of the anti-Netanyahu opposition, there is maybe a hope or a fantasy, let's put it that way, of finding some way of creating a government that excludes Yair Golan and the Democrats and that closes the door definitively on having a potential Arab party in the coalition. And that's what worries me, that there is some kind of behind the scenes jockeying, because like we were talking about Likud satellite parties. Well, Avigdor Lieberman was also a Netanyahu confidant. And in some sense, that party is a Likud satellite. And Naftali Bennett works for Netanyahu. And that party is in some sense a Likud satellite party. Ideologically, there isn't that much difference between those different shades of right. I mean, we can talk about the nuances. What does worry me is that if an opportunity presented itself where these more right-wing parties in the opposition could say, we're going to make the coalition and Likud is welcome to join, or a rump of the Likud is welcome to join. We're going to exclude Yair Golan. We're going to exclude Mansour Abbas. I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility. I think that would be a way that kind of like Eisenkot could almost be taken by surprise, much in the way that he was taken by surprise with the Bennett-Lapid merger, where he's like, I'm riding high, I'm on the horse, as they say, and then all of a sudden he's kind of blindsided by machinations happening elsewhere. Last thing I'll say on this is I was convinced that this is a possibility because Avigdor Lieberman published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in which he described himself as a candidate for the Israeli prime minister. Now, everyone calls themselves a candidate for the Israeli prime minister, but there's been a very concerted campaign that's happened on social media and in the press in English and in Hebrew for someone like Lieberman's going to do a Bennett, where he'll be the prime minister. And then if Prime Minister Avigdor Lieberman with his right-wing views, why couldn't a kind of like rump Likud leave the failed Netanyahu leadership and bring themselves into a right-wing broad Zionist coalition? And so that does worry me in terms of and I think because of the trauma of the changed government with Mansour Abbas, there's an expressed desire to find a way out of having to be in that situation again.
I'll also say regarding the fear that the Democrats and Yair Golan are going to be pushed out, there are already machinations for that happening. One of the earliest attack ads against Eisenkot said that without Yair Golan and the Arabs, Eisenkot doesn't have a coalition. So the Likud campaign is already trying to say, sitting with the Democrats, sitting with the Labor Party's merger is quote unquote just as bad or just as leftist or just as traitorous as sitting with Balad or one of the non-Zionist or anti-Zionist Arab majority parties.
In this week's developments, we have a continuation of what we discussed last week, the drama with the Ram Party. We are waiting for Mansour Abbas's Ram Party to officially break with the Islamic Movement Shura Council so he can appoint center-left Jewish Zionist politician Yoav Segalovich as his number two, for the Ram Islamic Party to have a number two who's a Jewish Zionist. This past week, Segalovich officially quit Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid's party. Both of you have written deep dive pieces into Eisenkot and his positions, what he believes, as far as we know from what he's saying so far in the campaign and his past history. Do you believe he's willing to lead a coalition that would include Ram, presumably in this new Arab-Jewish configuration with Segalovich in it, and survive the slings and arrows that the Bennett-Lapid coalition of change did not manage to do?
He's already more or less said that it's something he wouldn't rule out. When he put out his preconditions for partnering with this party in a coalition, none of them ruled out the United Arab List or Ram Party. The United Arab List believes in the principles of the Declaration of Independence, as far as we know. They have stated that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. They check pretty much all the boxes, and they weren't involved in the government that so many in the opposition, including Eisenkot, have said led to October 7th. At the same time, about 60%, I believe, of the Israeli public doesn't want to see them in a coalition. So it is difficult to see them doing something that could be so detrimental to their support. As supportive this party may be of Jewish statehood and democracy, I think it'll be very difficult to get the Israeli public to forget, even with a Yesh Atid Jewish guy on the list, that this started out as an Islamist party. And technically, until they do formally break, they are an Islamist party.
I agree. I think Eisenkot basically said, as close to he can without saying it explicitly, that he would be on board. I think that his opposition or tentativeness would be even softened if Segalovich is on this list, because of Segalovich is such a normie. I actually think regardless of what happens with this party in this process, and, for whatever disagreements I personally may have with the social positions of Mansour Abbas and the United Arab List, I think that the normalization of Arab-Jewish partnership in this way is a huge milestone in Israeli politics, and could pave the way for a lot of different kinds of combinations that we can't yet think of, because Arab-Jewish joint parties have really been the purview of the non-Zionist left in Israel. Hadash, Standing Together, has a party, and it's a phenomenon that is framed in the Israeli political discourse as kind of beyond the pale of the mainstream. And I think having a former police commissioner sit as number two in an Arab-led party changes, into my mind, some of that calculus. And I think that, we can, as we've been talking, I think we're being able to spell out two very different potential scenarios for what could happen in October. A government where Gadi Eisenkot and Yashar is the biggest party, and then the third biggest party is Yair Golan and the Democrats, and the political kingmaker is Mansour Abbas and Yoav Segalovich. That's a very different kind of government than the Naftali Bennett Avigdor. I mean, those parties will still be in that coalition, but they won't be setting the tone in the same way. And I think that honestly, right, the anti-Netanyahu right is getting scared of that possibility. Just recently, I think Avigdor Lieberman was because Yair Golan, who's the leader of the Democrats, said something along the lines of, if we win 12 seats, I'm Minister of Defense. And everyone sort of freaked out, oh my God. This guy, even though he was a major
he was the deputy chief of the IDF.
Reportedly, Netanyahu's preferred candidate over Eisenkot to be the IDF chief. Anyway, all of which to say, some of this is baloney, but I think that the right fears the level of the way that a center-left government that includes an Arab party could demonstrate that it can govern and be accepted by the Israeli people is a prospect that scares a lot of right-wingers, including those who dislike Netanyahu.
And it's scary to think about the right getting that scared. That's, the poison machine is going to be on overdrive if this, what you describe happens in the campaign. And people worry also about political violence, because when the right gets scared, often scary things happen. Linda, I can't let you go without talking about your recent really interesting article, a great piece you just published in Haaretz about the outreach to immigrants in the various parties. We've been seeing immigration to Israel plunge during the war years. So are immigrants really a factor in the election?
Apparently, immigrants are a very large factor in the election, and not in the same way that we thought they were 10 years ago. The messaging to them is very, very, very different. And although we haven't been seeing the immigration patterns that we were beforehand, where people are coming in from Western Europe or coming in from the United States and Canada or, the United Kingdom, because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw the number is about 180,000 immigrants come in over the last 5 years or so, which is an enormous number and a really powerful voting bloc that can be captured. And they have very different concerns from previous waves of immigrants from the same region. And they have concerns that are entirely their own, that never really applied to immigrant groups that came in before them.
There's a lot of talk among pollsters about what they're calling the Russian liberal vote.
Yeah.
It used to be that those voters were super right wing in some ways, and you see this if you walk in Tel Aviv, there's a Russian Ukrainian hipster scene that is really vibrant actually in the city. Are those the voters?
So yes, all of these guys are tattoo artists. Not literally, but just imagine. They're mostly younger people who came fleeing war or fleeing conscription to a war that they do not believe in. There are people who came fleeing what they see as a dictatorship, and they do not want the country that they fled to become a dictatorship. They want rights. They want to lower the cost of living. They want an end to corruption. And they're looking at this place and they're saying, I don't just want this to be a temporary refuge. I want this to be a home. And in order to do that, there are certain things that they're going to need to make happen, such as ending the constant cycle of wars that we've been having, division between synagogue and state, which was also, I should note, a very important factor in the 1990s Aliyah from the same area. A lot of them aren't necessarily recognized as Jewish by the rabbinate, and they are running into legal, social, all sorts of hurdles. I should mention one of the issues that they have that other immigrant waves have never had is a lot of the time they have difficulty setting up a new financial life here because of sanctions on their bank accounts in Russia. How do you move over your money when your money is locked away because of, international geopolitics? And how do you solve that as a country that is trying to welcome them in? Meanwhile, this isn't necessarily a country that's trying to welcome them in, because this is a far-right government with significant religious representation who's saying we don't want all of these people who aren't technically Jews to be coming in and staying here.
Thanks, Linda. It's a really great article. I recommend that everybody go in and read it on Haaretz. To wrap up the podcast, as we usually do, what are you guys looking forward to in the coming week ahead in the campaign?
We're going to see the Likud primaries. And so that I think will give us a sense of where the party is. Those candidates have released their campaigns, many of them running against each other on the same slogan, which is beating the left. It's just a funny thing in a country where there is effectively barely there's a left, but it's not robust not as robust as we would like to see. And the other things that I think are down the pipe are basically what's going to happen with the Board of Peace plan in Gaza, what is going to happen in the West Bank, which is, as Linda said, is seems to be boiling over, and then of course the Iran negotiations, which are at any given moment seem like they could fall through.
On an election level, I want to look at the mergers and acquisitions, especially with these cute little baby offshoot parties, and see where they go and who they link up with and who they refuse to link up with, and the beautiful Mean Girls drama that comes out of who they will and will not sit with. I also want to know if we're going to war or not. That is still, I think, in the back of everybody's minds. And every 2 weeks, it feels like everybody kind of packs a go bag just in case. And then we wake up and we're like, oh no, phew, that one's over, until it happens again. So crossing my fingers until October 27th that we're done with that for the time being.
We've all got our fingers crossed in many different directions. That wraps things up, guys. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Linda, so much, as always, for joining me and sharing your sharp analysis of what's going on in the campaign.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Allison.
And that wraps things up for this episode of the Haaretz Election Podcast. Thanks to my guests, Joshua Leifer and Linda Diane, and to producer and editor Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube or on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen. And please, if you're so inclined, leave us a comment if you liked us, if you didn't like us, what you think about the elections, and leave us a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, including, of course, Josh's columns and Linda's great stories, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.